I've talked about Breaking Bad a lot on this channel, whether I'm ranking all the episodes, the titles of those episodes, the hottest female characters. It would seem like I've said everything there is to say at this point. But recently, I've been looking back at my episode ranking videos and realized that they kinda sucked. I basically just said what happened in each episode with minimal commentary beyond some funny bits. And my opinions on a lot of those episodes have changed quite a bit since then. So this time, we'll be going back through each season of both Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul and ranking them from least to most good. This way, I can talk more broadly about the overarching plots of each season, instead of yapping about every single thing that happens. And if you've already seen my previous videos, you might find some of the stuff I'm going to say a bit surprising. So without further ado, these are my final thoughts on the Breaking Bad universe. Number 11. Breaking Bad Season 1. Before I even started making this video, I knew this would be at the bottom. I've always considered Breaking Bad's debut season to be kind of the black sheep of the series, and a bit of a hurdle you have to jump over to get to the really good stuff. But looking back, and after rewatching the season all the way through for the first time in years, it's really not that bad. Still doesn't quite live up to everything that came after it, but it's still a quality season of TV. The best thing about Season 1 is that it nails the pilot, probably the most important task of any show. It's easily the best episode of the season, and pretty much does everything you could possibly want from a first episode. So much shit happens in the span of an hour, going from Walt eating veggie bacon at the start to murdering blokes by the end. There also isn't really much of that pilot weirdness that you sometimes get in shows where characters feel dramatically different from how they act in the rest of the series. Everyone's traits are pretty clearly established, except Hank is slightly less racist in the later seasons. This episode also does a great job at getting you rooting for Walt right off the bat, but how long you'll continue to root for him is very much viewer dependent. Anyways, awesome first episode, and the following two are also really damn good, with episode 3 giving us Walt's first major moral dilemma, deciding what to do with Crazy 8 who's chilling in the basement. The fault with season 1 is that the remaining 4 episodes don't really come close to the previous one's quality. None of it is bad, of course, this is Breaking Bad we're talking about, but whenever I look back at this season, I struggle to remember much of what happens. Tuco gets introduced, who serves his purpose fine, but I was never a fan of a character. The highlight for me is actually the episode where Gretchen and Elliot are introduced, and we get the first major sense of Walt not entirely being in the meth game for the betterment of his family. We get very few bits of the Schwartzes throughout the show, so this episode feels pretty special looking back. And this is just a me thing, but whenever the show is focusing on something not entirely Walt or Jesse centric, mainly any shenanigans involving Hank or Marie, I'm just waiting for it to end so we can get back to the real shit. But the biggest issue with the season is that it doesn't have an ending. It was originally going to have 9 episodes, ending with the super tense Grilled, but thanks to the writer's strike they had to lop off the last 2 and we were left with a measly 7, and a finale where not much happens other than a quick barrel heist and a drug deal. Thankfully the writers made up for this with the later seasons, where the last 4 or so episodes are always firing on all cylinders, but we'll get to those later. So yeah, season 1 is a fine intro to the world of Breaking Bad, but it's all uphill from here. Number 10. Breaking Bad Season 2. This was a tough one to place, because the highs of this season are really damn high. The back half of this season has many of the absolute best moments of the entire show, whether it be the introduction of the one and only Saul Goodman, the 4 Days Out episode, and especially the conclusion to Jane's storyline. But there are also some pretty low points. This is the series' first attempt at some sort of overarching narrative, with the black and white teddy bear vignettes that open 4 of the episodes, that not so subtly spell out what's going to go down in the finale. I didn't like these when I first watched the show, and I still don't like them now. Sure, the first time around are pretty mysterious and make you wonder what's going on, but the imagery of a finale scene combined with how easy it is to figure out the messaging with the episode titles just kinda cheapens the eventual payoff of the planes exploding. Plus, for only the second season, it feels like a pretty big leap in stakes to suddenly have mass civilian casualties, but overall it's not a big detriment. The other issue I have is that after the Grilled episode, not much exciting stuff happens until Saul is introduced. This is maybe the only time in the series where I think what Jesse gets up to is a lot more engaging than Walt, who doesn't do much except walk around naked. Jesse gets some major development throughout this quiet period, getting kicked out of his house and then moving into a new place where he meets Jane. Their relationship is the heart of this season, and it's all really good. There's also the highlight episode Peekaboo, which is probably the best Jesse episode of the whole series. So thankfully he carries this slow stretch of season 2, and once we get to the Saul episode, it's all uphill from there. His presence makes the show about 100 times better, and I honestly think his few episodes in this season are the peak of his hilarity. He gets plenty of good stuff throughout the third season too, not so much after that, but I feel like the writers really knew how to utilize him properly here at his introduction. Better Call Saul is a fantastic self-contained episode, but the real showstopper is the following 4 days out. I've talked before about how this is a top 5 episode of Breaking Bad, and it's only grown on me even more since then. Walt and Jesse's chemistry is electric. There's so many iconic lines, and there's no bullshit. Just 2 guys out in the desert. The show is always at its best when Walt and Jesse are stuck in a situation, and this is the pinnacle of that for sure. The Grilled episode is another great example of this, and honestly the most tense scenario of the whole series. I remember watching that episode and thinking, how the hell could they possibly get out of this one? And it's not the last time I had that thought watching this show. The last standout I want to mention is the penultimate episode, Phoenix. This is definitely a lot more heavy on the drama than the other episodes I mentioned, and it's one of the darkest episodes of the series, right up there with Ozymandias. We all know how good that last scene is, but the rest of the episode does an amazing job at building up to it. Walt's confrontation with Jane, then the conversation with Donald, which is one of my favorite scenes ever by the way, and that being what makes Walt decide to go back to Jesse's place, meaning Donald is like 1% responsible for Jane's demise. It's an incredible series of unfortunate events, and no episode until Ozymandias ever recaptures that same feeling of hopelessness. So there's heaps of amazing stuff in this season, plus you've got Gus Fring thrown in the mix, so the fact that I still put it this low on the totem pole should say a lot about the peak we have ahead of us. Number 9. Better Call Saul Season 2. So here's where things start to get tricky. Ranking the Breaking Bad seasons to me was very easy. The show has quite a few ups and downs, which makes deciding which season goes where not too difficult. When it comes to Better Call Saul though, all 6 of the seasons are so consistent that you could honestly put them in any order and it'd be valid. I've changed my mind a lot over the years, but as it currently stands, I'm going to give it to Season 2 as the bottom of the pile. Which I hate to do because there's stuff in here that I think is the very best the show has to offer, mainly anything to do with Jimmy at Davis and Maine, but there's plenty that also comes across as treading water. To start with negatives, Mike's storyline this season isn't really anything to write home about. It starts off great with a price plot, and the baseball cards episode is one of my favorites for this very reason. But after that wraps up, we get into his conflict with the Salamancas, first with Tuco, and then Hector gets in the mix and my interest falls off a cliff. For only the second season of the show, this plotline really just feels like filling time until we can drag Gus into the picture, and not much happens throughout this plot other than Mike trolling Hector a few times. Mike's story is consistently less engaging than Jimmy's throughout pretty much the entire show, but this season is where the discrepancy is most noticeable. And speaking of Jimmy, I think his storyline through this season is maybe his best ever. I completely adore his tenure at Davis and Maine. It's such a classic Jimmy McGill scenario, where he's given this opportunity to do honest work as a competent lawyer, and of course he screws it up with his chicanery. It fuels some great drama between he and Kim, and Chuck's influence on him also leads to some really juicy stuff. This plot also introduces so many great side characters, mainly Cliff, Aaron, and Omar. One of the biggest improvements in this season over the first is Kim, who was pretty squarely a supporting player in season 1, but is promoted to a main right alongside Jimmy and Mike. She gets so much great stuff this season, and her relationship with Jimmy gets really fleshed out. The bolstered screen time of Kim and Mike does mean that Chuck and Howard are left with not much to do this season, but it's not too bad since most of it is laying the groundwork for next season, where they have pretty substantial roles. It feels weird to put a season this good so low on the list, but my opinion could change tomorrow, so whatever. Number 8. Breaking Bad Season 4. I know this is many people's favourite season, but I've never quite loved it as much as the rest of you. Like Season 2, it suffers from a first 2/3 that are mostly slow setup for a last 4 episodes of pure mayhem. And while those 4 episodes are amazing, it takes a bit too long to get there. I feel like this easily could have been a 10-episode season without missing much, but I don't know how shit works behind the scenes, so I won't linger too much on that. Let's just look at what we ended up with, which is still a quality season of TV. This is basically the cartel season of Breaking Bad, which is why I'm not so hot on it. I can appreciate it for what it is, but I've never been big into the cartel side of a story, and much prefer when the focus is squarely on Walt and Jesse shenanigans. Much of the season is spent peeling back the layers on Gus's backstory, his conflict with the Salamancas, and the heightening tensions between him and the cartel. On first watch, I liked all this stuff, but I just don't think it's as rewatchable as other aspects of the show. They also drag Jesse into this plot to develop his relationship with Mike and show him becoming more independent, but it also means he spends quite a bit of a season away from Walt, which is bad news in my book, since the show at its very core is the two of them together. Thankfully, the season does end up benefiting from a growing rift between them once the Brock angle comes in during the last couple episodes. But yeah, Walt himself does basically nothing for the vast majority of the season other than complain about how Gus is going to kill him. This highly volatile Walt does lead to some great bits, mainly the I am the one who knocks scene, and especially the last 10 minutes of a crawl space episode. I also really like the scene with him and Skylar early in the season when they're planning how to reveal his gambling backstory.
I'm out of control. I mean, this whole thing makes me look like crap.
This has to be a warts and all story, Walt, and we both look bad.
Oh, well, how do you look bad exactly? Where is the I slept with my boss bullet point? I can't seem to find that anywhere.
And once we get to those last 4 episodes, it's pretty much a non-stop peak until the end. Salute is an incredibly cool cap-off to the cartel plot, and it's commendable that the writers managed to get us rooting for Gus to take down Eladio when we were only introduced to him just 2 episodes ago. Following that up is Crawl Space, probably my favorite episode of the season, where shit starts to completely unravel for Walt. Bryan Cranston is at his best when Walt has completely lost control, and boy does he deliver the goods in the last stretch of this episode. My only real issues with Face Off is that Jesse spends most of the time doing nothing in jail, and Mike is completely MIA thanks to his injury in Mexico. I guess the writers realized that there's no way Walt would be able to take down Gus with Mike in the picture, so they just had to remove him. Other highlights of the first episode of the season, and the Marie Kleptomania plot making a comeback. Most people seem to really love this season though, so let's hear that perspective real quick.
Hey everyone, it's Better Watch TV here to defend Season 4. It's not my favorite, Season 5 is, but it's pretty close. It starts off with a bang with Box Cutter, such a well done and important episode, and probably with the goriest scene in the Breaking Bad universe. It's interesting that this season is bookended with shocking gore, but unlike Face Off, I think the Box Cutter scene is the only one that's hard to watch due to its realism. Then, yes, there are some weak episodes like all seasons have, notably 38 Snub and Shotgun. But I think Open House gets too much hate. Now that Fly is getting more love, Open House gets the dishonor of being the lowest rated episode on IMDb, and frankly that makes me even more upset. But I like watching Marie. Also, it isn't just a Marie episode. Lots of characters have good moments in this, including Hank, Huell, and Bogdan. And there's important plot development with Walt and Skylar positioning themselves to buy the car wash, and Tim dropping off Gail Bedeker's notebook. What's not to love? Then, I believe the season ends with not just 4, but 7 incredible episodes in a row. Has there ever been another run of 7 consecutive episodes that are so consistently great? You might say that Bug doesn't belong in the mix, but I claim that people's memory of the episode gets tainted by its forgettable title. The whole thing builds and builds to what might have been the series finale if Breaking Bad didn't get picked up for a 5th season. I'm grateful that we did get season 5 and not just end on Walt's triumph, but Face Off would have also been an excellent series finale. So season 4 should be considered the second best Breaking Bad season, although I would understand if you called it the best. I do not understand ranking it any lower though.
Number 7. Better Call Saul Season 6. Much like Breaking Bad Season 4, the final season of Better Call Saul has many of the best scenes and episodes ever, but is also the season I have the most issues with by far. I think this is the most inconsistent season with some bizarre pacing and other weird stuff, but overall it's a great conclusion to the show and the Breaking Bad world as a whole. There's a lot to talk about, so I'm going to break things down by storylines. So the meat of this show has always been the Jimmy Kim story, and the first 9 episodes of the season mean to wrap up this prequel era. And the writers do manage to do that, with a killer final moment between them and fun and games, but everything leading up to those last few episodes is a bit lackluster. The first 6 episodes are dedicated to Jimmy and Kim trolling Howard. Many wacky shenanigans to be had, and most of it is really fun stuff, especially the car episode, but the pace of it is almost glacial. I wouldn't mind if we had a 16 episode season with more room to breathe, but the result of spending half a season on this setup means that we then have to blow through all the major earth-shattering stuff in just 3 short episodes so we can get to the Nebraska era. I'm of course all good with a slow pace, I mean this is Better Call Saul, but it just feels like the allocation of time wasn't quite figured out. Like they were running the season as if it was just another usual one, and then halfway through they remembered this is the last one, but instead of restarting they just amped up the pace to 11, and suddenly the show is flying through major events like a bullet train. I think it would have been better for the season if we either had a 16 episode runtime like Breaking Bad, or we tighten up the writing so maybe the plan gets executed in episode 6, and then we'd have another episode's worth of wiggle room to spend more time on the important stuff. Thankfully, the time we do spend on the good stuff is some of the best of the entire show, particularly plan and execution, which I already mentioned, and fun and games, which includes the prequel era incredibly well. Thanks to the lack of wiggle room, it does have to jump over some plot points that would have made great scenes, but the last scene of Jimberly breaking up is simply fabulous. It also puts a pretty nice bow on Mike and Gus's stories, with Mike realizing he's no better than the Salamancas, choosing to continue down his bad choice road alongside Gus, who can't put aside his grand revenge plan to be intimate with another human being. But once again, the story has so little space that we just have to skip over the lab being finished and hand wave it with, oh yeah, we'll just find someone else to do it. Then there's the point and shoot episode, which these days I'm calling the worst episode of the show. Has some great bits at the start and end, but it just feels so cartoonish and obvious. We spend exactly one scene in a random episode setting up Gus having this gun in the lab, and then when we do get to the payoff, there isn't any wrench thrown in his plan. He grabs a gun, shoots Lalo, that's it. Mike spends the entire episode bumbling around with his goons and accomplishes nothing.
How'd you know Lalo would be at the laundry?
Bro, where the hell else would he go? You all know Lalo's been obsessed with his shit for ages now. It just feels weird to have this whole Lalo-Gus conflict solved in just one short episode. And speaking of Lalo, I think that's as good a segue as any into my biggest problem with this season. Lalo and Nacho. So ever since Lalo's introduction, his story has been closely connected with Nacho's. His first scene, he shows up uninvited and starts bossing him around, replacing Hector as the new Salamanca villain of the show. Throughout Season 5, we get to see Nacho form a closer relationship with Lalo at the behest of Gus to find out what he's up to. Lalo comes to respect and appreciate Nacho after initially dismissing him. He brings him to his headquarters in Mexico to introduce him to the big boss and fully initiate him into the Salamanca family. And then, Lalo is betrayed by Nacho and his family is gunned down in the middle of the night. Lalo knows that Gus put out the hit on him, but this shot right here sets up that he knows Nacho was involved, and he's pissed off. So how does Season 6 conclude the story of Nacho and Lalo? Well, Nacho dies immediately by Gus's doing, and then Lalo fucks off to Germany to rizz up Ziegler's widow, then returns to Albuquerque to immediately be killed by Gus's doing. Now, I understand that Lalo's rivalry with Gus is just as important as with Nacho, but to focus his whole storyline this season on taking down Gus without so much as a thought as to what Nacho could be up to was just a big missed opportunity. When Lalo said he knew there was proof, I just assumed he was going to find Nacho and then use him as a pawn in the war against Gus, with Ignacio having to finally break free from these puppet masters and make a break for freedom. But instead, Nacho spends 3 episodes stuck under Gus's thumb until he just gives up and accepts his death. And that last scene where he gets to verbally destroy the Salamancas before offing himself is fantastic, no doubt, but it left me a bit depressed honestly. Nacho spent basically the whole show trying to become independent and get his life back on track, and his story ends with him just losing. And then he's promptly forgotten about and the show moves on like it's business as usual. Maybe this is my own expectations warping my thoughts on what we got, but I think Nacho's story needed to end on a positive note, a la Jesse and Breaking Bad, and it needed to be intertwined with whatever shenanigans Lalo's getting up to. The writers didn't even attempt to give Lalo anything juicy this season, by having him just disappear in the first episode and not showing up again until the end of episode 5, and then just a few episodes later, he's dead. It was cool to see him in Germany hanging out with Margarita, but it feels like a huge wasted opportunity for some really strong character stuff. Nacho should be saying all this stuff to Lalo, not Hector. Gus can still be the one to kill Lalo. Maybe Nacho manages to get out with his head attached before the final showdown, leading Lalo to execute a hasty plan in the lab that gets himself killed. I could do a whole what if scenario right now, but for the sake of brevity, let's move on. The final piece of the Season 6 puzzle is everything in the black and white world, which is where shit gets really interesting. 4 episodes are dedicated to concluding this plotline, which is more than I expected when they announced the season would have 13. I think this portion of the show really benefits from additional watches, since the first time through it can feel pretty jarring. Going from the explosive trifecta of episodes 7, 8, and 9 right into a wacky mall heist with Jeff and Tall Jeff is TV whiplash like no other. But on subsequent viewings, I can appreciate that the show takes an episode to reset things, so it can build back up to the finale. What I like most about these episodes is the way they intercut flashbacks to Breaking Bad that parallel what's going on in Nebraska. Episode 11 especially is one that I really didn't care for on first watch, but nowadays I think it's one of the best of the whole show. I love how the extra scenes not only enhance the episode itself, but also retroactively make Saul's character in Breaking Bad way more interesting, since we see it's basically his fault that Walt managed to make it so far in his criminal escapades. Also love getting a bit more of Saul and Mike during that era, and of course, it's always good to see Bryan Cranston and Aaron Paul doing their thing. Unfortunately, Jesse has little to do other than be there for fan service's sake, but Walt actually gets some pretty good stuff to chew on, specifically in the finale. And speaking of the finale, the best thing I can say about this season is that it totally nails the last episode. It was pretty much everything I could have possibly wanted out of a conclusion to this series, and I've already talked about it a lot on this channel, so I'll leave it at that. So to put a bow on this season 6 rant, there's plenty to love, but there's just enough issues and missed opportunities to drag it down for me. I know you shouldn't judge art for what it could have been, but hey, it's my video and this is just what I think. Number 6. Better Call Saul Season 3. This one is very similar to Season 2 in many ways. Basically, the lawyer side of a story is spectacular and some of the best shit ever, and the Mike plot exists. Thankfully, his story is a step up from Season 2, with the introduction of Gus making things a bit more exciting, at least at first. I like the first couple episodes where he's doing his investigating shtick, especially the car dismantling montage and the first Pollo scene. But once Gus shows up proper, not much of note actually happens for the rest of the season. Mike gets some pretty good character stuff with Stacy and the support group, and I really like this bit where he's working on the playground, but the only developments of Gus is Mike deciding to launder his money through him and Lydia. Mike doesn't even show up in the finale because he's just that unimportant, and Gus doesn't get to do anything at all until next season, which thankfully makes up for how lackluster him and Mike are currently. The breakout star of the cartel side of the plot is actually Nacho, who finally gets to be a character after 2 seasons on the bench. Hector is now his problem instead of Mike's, and this leads to some pretty tense stuff, particularly when Nacho decides to put a stop to his malarkey by slipping him some sugar pills. Love that scene, and also the stuff in the finale where his plan almost works until it's stopped by Gus and his revenge boner. So Nacho saves the cartel plot this season from being a complete nothing burger, but on the other end of the spectrum, the lawyer plot is firing on all cylinders. The first half is the war against Chuck, which culminates in one of the best TV episodes ever, Chicanery. And everything leading up to that episode is awesome as well. Jimmy breaking into Chuck's house on a rampage is a fantastic scene, and I love seeing him go to jail as well and Bill's reaction. But it really cannot be understated just how good that Chicanery episode is. Like, I've seen it 20 times now and it still has me locked in the entire time. I really wish the show did more trial-focused episodes like this, because this one proves that the writers know what they're doing, and there's no boring Mike plot to bring it down. The second half of the season is a bit more all over the place. Now that Jimmy's lost his license, he's doing random shenanigans to keep the lights on. This means we get a lot more of a film crew, which I love, and the last couple episodes get into some pretty depressing stuff with Jimmy trolling Irene, and of course everything going on with Chuck. This season really belongs to Charles McGill, with the entire thing being one big downfall for his character. Michael McKean gets to really amp up his game, with Chuck at his most villainous in the whole first half, and then just falling apart in the last few episodes. Even though this guy has been so hateable throughout the show, they managed to make you really feel for him, or at least I did. Chuck is a huckster fuck, but he always thought he was doing the right thing for Jimmy, and this bit where he shuts him down and says he never cared just hurts so bad. And it's made even better by the series finale, where we see that the exact opposite thing happened with Chuck trying to reach out to Jimmy, and both times they shut each other down. Jimmy and Chuck really is the core of the show to me, and this season has most of their best stuff. The finale in particular is maybe the most depressing episode ever, and watching Chuck rip his house to shreds with that amazing soundtrack, followed by him admitting defeat and burning himself to the ground, is all amazing. Howard also gets to step up and have a bit more going on, since he has quite a bit of conflict with Chuck and ends up, in his eyes, responsible for his death. All the lawyer-related stuff in this season is just spectacular, easily the best season of that kind of stuff. The only reason this isn't a 10 out of 10 is that Mike and Gus stuff being a bit lacking. Number 5. Better Call Saul, Season 5. This is another season that I've grown more fond of on subsequent watches. It has a 4.5 episode stretch of some absolute bangers, but outside of those, I found the rest to be a bit lacking first time round. The only thing I don't really like about this season is Mike's plot for the first 5 episodes. After capping Werner, he's become a depressed drunk, which, fair enough, but it feels out of character how angry he is with Kaylee, and the solution of his plotline is just Gus telling him that revenge is awesome. Gus wants to get revenge against the Salamancas, of course, but who does Mike want revenge on? Maddie's killers are long dead, and he's made it pretty clear that he doesn't care about Hector anymore. This plot feels like they introduced another roadblock on Mike's journey to becoming Gus's right-hand man that we see in Breaking Bad, but then they didn't have a solution, so they just kind of took away the roadblock and then things are back to normal. The problem here is that Mike's arc effectively concluded in Season 4. Throughout that season, we saw him working with Gus just like in Breaking Bad, and at the end, he completes that last test to fully become the guy he was always meant to be. Sure, it sucks that he had to kill Werner, and naturally he's gonna feel bad about it, but it doesn't seem like there's much more story there. However, we still have 2 seasons left, so we have to come up with more stuff for Mike to do. Thankfully, once he and Gus are back to normal, there's a lot of good stuff, mainly him and Saul getting to have scenes together again. The Bagman episode especially is a huge highlight, just an hour of these two roughing it in the desert. I also like seeing him do his PI shtick with the librarian. If you ask me, Mike is at his best when he's just doing his thing, and I would have been totally fine if he didn't really have any more internal drama during his last 2 seasons. All my favorite bits of him from here on are just random scenes of Saul or Kim anyway, so there you go. And to wrap up this segment of things I don't like about season 5, I think Gus throughout the show is really weak sauce compared to in Breaking Bad. He pretty much acts like a caricature of his future self, which is fine if we're going for he's not yet the Gus we saw in Breaking Bad, but he never has any moments where you see that he's still got things to learn on his journey to becoming a meth overlord. He does stupid shit, mainly in season 6, but it all works out for him, so he never has a reason to reflect on his actions. Season 5 is the worst of these problems, and out of nowhere, the characters are randomly talking about this mysterious event in Santiago that Gus was involved with. Lalo mentions it in episode 1, and then Gus brings it up when he's talking to Shula. It seems like there was some situation where Gus did some fucked up shit, and it seemed to me like something that will be elaborated on, but it's never mentioned again after this. Maybe just got lost in the shuffle with everything going on in season 6, but on rewatch it's pretty random. Thankfully, everything else going on this season is top quality. We've finally entered the Saul Goodman criminal lawyer era, and the first half of the season is dedicated to giving us as many wacky schemes as possible now that Jimmy's got his license back. I just want to cut to the chase and say that my favorite episode this season is Wexler v. Goodman, which has all the hallmarks of an episode that's right up my alley. The film crew is here, Saul gets to troll the Schweikart team including Kim, the commercial bit is hilarious, and there's a really great argument at the end of the episode. This kicks off an insane run of bangers, including Bagman, which is a totally unexpected change of pace, and then Bad Choice Road, which is another contender for best of the season. This solidified Lalo as a top tier villain, and Kim also gets a moment in the spotlight to shut him down. I would like to say that it's all bangers till the end, but the season finale is a bit all over the place. The Jimberly plot is super low key, with them just hiding out in a hotel and plotting against Howard. Meanwhile in Mexico, hitmen are sent to kill Lalo, and the show suddenly turns into a cartoon, with these supposed experts being thwarted by Lalo's Home Alone-esque booby traps. There's still some great bits in there, mainly Nacho and Lalo's last scene together, which is unbelievably tense, but it ends the season on a bit of a sour note in my opinion. Last thing I want to mention is the cinematography takes a huge step up this season. Like, the show already looked great before, but suddenly the compositions and lighting and coloring all look miles better, and you can tell from the very first episode. I don't know what changed, but this season is easily the best looking out of both this show and Breaking Bad. There's just not much to complain about here, just a really solid season with a minimal amount of bullshit. Number 4. Better Call Saul Season 1. The first season of a funny lawyer show does not play around. Everyone who says this show starts out boring is just wrong. This season has always held a special place in my heart for being the most focused on the lawyer shenanigans, with basically no fluff. The whole thing is about Jimmy McGill and Jimmy alone, and sets up this new side of Albuquerque so perfectly. Each episode has a bit of a standalone quality to it, while still adding to the developing plot, and the vibes are simply immaculate. Things are a lot more simple than Breaking Bad, and it means we get to spend a lot more time building up the characters. Kim is very squarely a support player, and Mike doesn't get his moment in the sunshine until halfway through the season. This may sound like a negative, but it means that the season has this very unique feel to it, where you're pretty much watching the same storyline the whole way through without cutting to other stuff. If you're not big into the lawyer plot and the Chuck drama, then I could see why this season doesn't appeal to you, but I love that shit, so it's right up my alley. Bob Odenkirk carries this season on his back hard, and it's impressive considering he didn't consider himself a dramatic actor before this. It was a gamble to build an entire show hinged on his performance, and he stepped up and knocked it out of the park. It helps that he gets to share so many scenes with Michael McKean. This is the season where they interact the most, and I love their dynamic. The two of them are the show to me, much like how Walt and Jesse were the heart of Breaking Bad. The season builds up to Chuck's betrayal so well, where the first time through there's hints, but you'll probably still be blindsided by the reveal. But on rewatch, everything is seen in a whole new light, and it feels so much more obvious. Chuck is probably my favorite character across both shows, and this first season does most of the heavy lifting in that regard. In terms of highlights, I genuinely love every episode, but the best ones would probably be Nacho, Rico, Pimento, and of course Alpine Shepherd Boy, aka the one with the sex toilet. It's hard for me to put into words why I love this season so much, but it's a huge comfort food for me, and I've watched it more than any other season by far. I even own it on Blu-ray. A true 10 out of 10, and we still have 3 to go. Number 3. Breaking Bad Season 3. Hey, remember Breaking Bad? Feels like we haven't talked about this show in a while. Season 3 is when they really started cooking with gas. It has some of the best drama, while also being the funniest season ever. Let's start with that first, because when I think of this season, I think of Walter White's incredible crash out arc through the first few episodes. Walt's in a pretty bad place at the start, with the plane crash and Skylar discovering the truth. And Walt's pretty bad at taking L's, so he's all over the place trying to get things back on track. Episode 4 especially is hands down the funniest of the series, where he goes apeshit trying to get revenge on Ted for cracking his wife. And don't forget when he tries to make a move on Carmen, which ends up getting him fired.
Yo, did he just get fired?
No. It's more like a sabbatical. Indefinite.
While we're on the subject of comedy, let's just go ahead and address The Fly in the Room, which is probably my favorite episode of the show. Sorry to be one of those people, but I think this shit is flawless. It's another 4 Days Out type thing, focusing solely on Jesse and Walt, except it's just a tiny bit better in my opinion. It's just as funny as that episode.
Dude, you scared the shit out of me. I mean, we say it's contamination. I mean, I'm thinking like an Ebola leak or something.
Ebola.
Yeah, it's a disease on the Discovery Channel where all your intestines sort of just slip right out of your butt.
Thank you. I know what Ebola is. Now tell me, what would a West African virus be doing in our lab?
But what elevates it beyond is the superb character drama in the last 20 minutes. Walt's drunken rambling about fate and Jane's dad and all that is really gripping, and Jesse accepting that he isn't to blame for Jane's death is a great moment for him. Not to mention the fact that Walt actually is responsible, making the whole thing a million times more depressing and tense. And you even get that moment where it seems Walt is finally going to drop the act and tell him the truth, but gets blueballed by the Fly. And that bit doesn't get paid off until one of the very last episodes. On the surface, this episode can seem redundant and skippable, but it's essential if you ask me. It's also the one I've rewatched the most, since with it being so self-contained, you can just pop it on without much thought and enjoy it in a vacuum. But enough about that. This season is also when the criminal side of the story really starts heating up. Gus and Mike are fully in the show now, and they're awesome as always, and the twins are also introduced to get revenge on Walt and then Hank. The twins are stupid and I hate them, but they serve their purpose just fine in this season, and the 1 minute confrontation is bloody awesome as we all know. Meanwhile, Jesse is in his depression arc after Jane dies, which is really sad to watch of course, but I do also get a pleasure out of watching Jesse suffer. I love his scene with Walt in the hospital, and that all it takes to get him back on the meth train is one compliment about his cooking ability. The real showstopper is the doubleheader finale of Half Measures and Full Measure, which minus a certain other season is my favorite finale of them all. I like it more than Face Off because all the characters are fully involved in the story and the stakes feel genuine. One more episode I want to highlight, Sunset, is a fantastic one that ends in one of my favorite scenes. Walt and Jesse are stuck in the RV with Hank right outside, and this is one of those classic situations where first time watching, I genuinely had no idea how the hell the writers were going to get out of it. But yeah, I love everything about this season, and I even used to say it was my favorite until my last rewatch. Number 2. Better Call Saul Season 4. And here we are at my pick for the best season of Better Call Saul. This one has slowly snuck up on me over the years, with each rewatch getting higher and higher up my rankings. For the longest time I was adamant that season 1 was the top dog, but this season is really something special, and we're going to go through it character by character. So Chuck is dead, which means Jimmy's in a pretty bad place. Or that's what you would think, but he actually seems to be taking it pretty chill. The best decision this season made was to not have Jimmy grieve Chuck like any other character, but to instead act as if nothing happened at all. It creates this tension not just between him and Kimberly, but also with us the audience, since we're just waiting for him to break down, and it seems like he never will. He eventually does, but not until the last episode of the season. He's also in his unemployment arc, which leads to some fun shenanigans at CC Mobile, and later his budding cell phone business with Huel. This is also the first season to have a big time skip, where we see Kimberly start to grow apart as they focus on their own things. Kim's arc this season is realizing that working for a big corporation isn't really what she wants to be doing, and discovering a new passion for pro bono work. Jimmy's weird-ass behavior after Chuck's death is driving a very subtle wedge between them that gets deeper and deeper until it finally snaps in the penultimate episode, after Jimmy fumbles his interview. This argument is one of their best scenes together, fantastic writing and performances. I might even like it more than the breakup in Fun and Games. We also get more of Kim's descent into her slipping side, and how it always brings her and James back together, especially in my favorite episode of the season called Shada. The scheme her and Jimmy concoct to free Huel Babineau from imprisonment is the best the writers ever came up with. Every bit is so funny. This is easily the best season for Mike's story. Him and Gus are on the same team finally, and they get cracking on the Super Lab, which leads to some great character stuff with the introduction of Werner. We've never seen Mike have a relationship with someone like this, and it's really cool to see him actually be friends with a normal dude. Unfortunately, things end up going sour thanks to Werner wanting to bang his hot wife, and Lalo arriving on the scene to ruin everything. The conclusion to Mike and Werner's story is super depressing, and feels like the logical endpoint to Mike's character arc, as I said before. He made the ultimate decision to kill a man for his evil boss, and now he's basically the guy we saw in Breaking Bad, especially when you count the extra 4 years between the shows where he has plenty of time to become more jaded. Also gotta love Mike's brief spat with Lalo in the finale, especially that parking lot scene. And speaking of, this is the season that introduces Lalo, who makes a hell of a first impression. He instantly breathes so much life into the cartel plot, which was pretty stagnant by that point. But once Lalo shows up, everyone suddenly has a purpose, which is why the cartel plot ends up being so good in season 5. I wish he didn't wait until basically the penultimate episode to show up, but I appreciate his inclusion regardless. All of these storylines are concluded in spectacular fashion in the finale episode Winner, which is the top 3 episode of the show. I already mentioned Mike's plot, but Jimmy's is where the real gold is at. So many amazing scenes here, like the scholarship thing where he stands up for Christy, the scene right after where he gives her a pep talk, and then the scene right after that when he breaks down in his car. A whole season of pretending Chuck's death didn't affect him, and then it finally all hits him like a ton of bricks. Bob Odenkirk really should have won an Emmy for this episode, but that ain't the world we live in. The cherry on top is the last 15 minutes where he speaks from the heart to the bar and wins back his license, and it's all emotional until that last second rug pull.
Wait, Jimmy, what?
It's all good, man.
This is the best ending to any season by far. A truly generational episode that caps off a flawless season. But sometimes, what you really want is hype moments and aura. Number 1. Breaking Bad Season 5. And to end things off, I present to you the least controversial opinion of all time. Breaking Bad's final season fucking rips. For the longest time, I was confident in my cool and unique opinion of Season 3 being the pinnacle of Breaking Bad, but after this last rewatch, I had no choice but to fold and accept the truth. You could argue that it's cheating since this is technically 2 seasons in 1, but both halves are 10 out of 10 anyway, so it doesn't really matter. When you have a show like this where there's a constantly escalating criminal enterprise that gets more chaotic each season, you need to have that downfall at some point. And that's what this season is. The first half shows Walter White as his most powerful and most evil, comically so, and then after one little mistake, the entire thing falls apart over the second half of the season. Let's discuss 5A and 5B separately for a bit because they're quite different beasts. 5A is like the last hurrah for the more comedic, lighthearted side of a show. There's still plenty of great drama here, mainly in the last couple episodes, but most of this is a fun romp with the greatest trio of all time, Mike, Walt, and Jesse. Anytime these 3 are on screen together is comedy gold, because Walt and Mike both hate each other, and Jesse's stuck in the middle being like, "Come on guys, stop fighting." There's no better example of this than the money distribution scene in Hazard Pay, which has so many great lines.
Okay, Walt, this is Saul Goodman's cut here, and this is going to be the Phantom Tax. Excuse me, Mike, this Phantom. Who is this? What is the Phantom Tax? Walt, the Phantom Tax is something that Fring paid before you decided to up and kill him.
I appreciate how much this season focuses on Mike, so by the time we get to his death, it feels like a real gut punch, especially considering he ends up dying for nothing, leaving his family nothing, Stacy will think he just ran off into the night, and he was killed by a bald loser for no reason. A very fitting conclusion to his character, and it hits even harder after you see all the other shit he went through in Better Call Saul. 5A has the most wacky schemes of any season, and they're all super memorable. Kicking off with a magnet escapade, then tenting the houses, and then the big set piece of the season, the train heist. This is one of the rare times Breaking Bad decides to do action, and it totally pulls it off. Sure, Bagman is a much more involved and impressive spectacle, but Dead Freight will always be the top dog for me. I always love seeing a plan executed in near flawless fashion, and this is exactly that. I like that each character has their own role to play, and that Walt's never-ending greediness almost ruins it. The other standout episodes are the last 2, Say My Name, where Walt gets to Aura Farm and kill Mike, and then Gliding Overall, where Walt takes the next logical step in his quest to become the most evil guy ever and teams up with literal Nazis. Not sure what the writers were thinking with that one, but Jack's gang served their purpose as guys more evil than Walt for us to root against. But that in itself is the main problem I have with Season 5. I feel like at this point our characters are also fleshed out that we didn't really need to introduce more villains onto the pile. This final season really should have had Walt as the endgame villain, but I guess that wouldn't work with the ending Vince was going for. Most of the drama in 5A comes from Skylar being scared shitless of Walt now that she knows he loves to bomb nursing homes. It's tough to watch, but there isn't really a resolution to it. We just do a time skip in the last episode, and then Skylar decides she's had enough, Walt quits, and then things are fine between them. In fact, once Hank starts trying to get her to join him against Walt, she's suddenly super loyal to him, and even denies his offer to turn himself in. And that seems like a good time to jump into 5B, the last 8 episodes of the show. 5A ends with the bombshell of Hank finally discovering the truth, which means the stage has been set for him as the final antagonist of the series. And I think that was an amazing choice to have Hank as the endgame, because he's the one who's been searching for Heisenberg since the very start of the show. It's also obviously a lot more personal than another season arc villain like Gus basically was. The Nazis technically do fill that position this season, but the real character drama is between Walt and Hank. The only issue I have is that it does mean we can't let Hank find out until the last season, which means he ends up looking like a total idiot at several points. Over time, I've come to look past Hank's idiocy, as it's built into his character from the start that he underestimates Walt, seeing him as a weak, broke guy with cancer, which, fair enough. I've always considered Hank to be one of my least favorite characters, but this final season does a lot to make me appreciate him. Second to Walt, he's the standout of these final episodes. 5B also finally gives Jesse some real drama, after he took a back seat for most of 5A to work as Mike and Walt's marriage counselor. He doesn't want any part in the Hank and Walt drama until he realizes Walt poisoned Brock, and from then on, Jesse is back to being a real character. I have an issue with how Jesse discovers the truth, mainly that I just don't think he's capable of connecting the dots from his dope being gone to the cigarette thing from ages ago. I'm not calling Jesse an idiot, but he was in a bit of a state at that moment, and I doubt his brain was working at 100% capacity. It just feels like a big logical leap for him to make, and it seems a bit sloppy on the writer's part. Thankfully, the next scene with him going psycho on Saul is amazing, so it was worth it. And then you get the Jesse and Hank team up, which is pretty unique. It's cool that in the last season, we're getting new dynamics between characters who've been in the show since the beginning, but haven't really talked much.
Yeah, no, Mr. White's gay for me. Everyone knows that.
So with all that set up, the last 4 episodes are all showstoppers. Tahajali's last 20 minutes are maybe the most tense the show has ever been, and it has one of the most evil cliffhangers ever. And then we get to Ozymandias. I've talked a lot of shit about this episode in the past, calling it overrated and barely scraping the top 10 episodes. Well, I've rewatched it since then, and I would like to make a formal apology. This episode really is as good as everyone says. I've said before that we needed that downfall of Walt after all his shenanigans, and this episode gives you that plus more. The official description of this episode says it all. Everyone copes with radically changing circumstances. Couldn't have said it better myself. It's crazy how there's like 4 contenders for best scene ever in this one episode. Bryan Cranston and Anna Gunn in this episode, Jesus Christ. I love a silly, goofy Walter White, but a Walter White whose entire world has crumbled around him, even better. So yeah, this episode is fully deserving of that perfect 10 on IMDb, but Fly is still better. Granite State is still my favorite episode, showing how depressed everyone is after Ozymandias. Saul's last scene with Walt is fantastic, and accidentally ended up being perfect foreshadowing for his own ending in Better Call Saul. Ed the Disappearer, played by the late great Robert Forster, is an awesome one-and-done character, and I love his scenes of Walt in the cabin.
Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium. 2 copies.
I'm not much of a movie guy.
I think Jesse's stuff is way over the top. Like, did we really need to kill his second girlfriend too? The one who had 0 character beyond being Jesse's girlfriend? But that's the only issue I have with this episode, and the ending scene where Walt gets mad at the TV and vanishes is elite. Lastly is Felina, the series finale. While it's been universally declared a goated ending, there's been a growing community of people who are less hot on it, and for very good reasons. They say Walt got off too easy. They say he shouldn't have won like he did. Some say it was all just a dream and he actually died in a cabin. I think these are very valid criticisms, I even agree with them, but I don't care. I think this is the perfect ending, and I wouldn't change a thing about it. I think this finale does a great job at giving Walt a chance at half redeeming himself, and no scene does it better than his last conversation with Skylar. This short scene makes the entire show for me. Walt admits that he did it for himself and he liked it. Obviously, that doesn't make up for all the shit that happened, but Skylar can find some appreciation for him telling the truth for once in that moment. That one scene of Skylar made it all worth it.
I was really... I was alive.
So yeah, season 5 is the top dog, simple as that. Or is it? If you'll indulge me, let's hear another side of a story.
Hello everyone, my name is Quinn the GM. I mostly talk about A Song of Ice and Fire on YouTube, but I've also been known to dip my toe into the waters of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, as I am a big fan of both shows. Recently, I rewatched Breaking Bad for the first time in years and was surprised how well it held up and how much I really still loved it. With that said, my opinions on it have shifted quite a bit from when I was younger and when I saw the show for the first time. Season 5 used to be my favorite. I thought nothing could beat it. Now, on rewatch, I think it is one of the weaker seasons. There are choices made during the 5th season, make me really question the trajectory of the show, and it all revolves around Walter White's characterization. Walter White, as mentioned, chemistry genius, the best meth cook in probably the world, but he is terrible at so many things. But when we get to season 5, he kills Gus, and then he's magically the greatest person in the world at every single thing. Every plan he makes ends up being kind of correct and the right move at any given point. And while yes, he did execute plans correctly in the earlier parts of the show, I think that was all very well weighted in him kind of failing as he went and needing to adapt on the fly, which is one thing that Walter White was always very good at. Here, it's just that everything that Walter says in season 5 goes. He feels like an entirely different character. And I was shocked that I hadn't seen more people discussing this after my rewatch, because it feels so obvious coming from season 4, where those elements of his character are very much on display. He is very flawed, and he is on the back foot for most of that season in this war with Gus. But overall, it's just very different going into season 5. And I think this is part of what results in the kind of twisted image of Walt that exists in pop culture. Walt is a badass. He's the coolest person ever. That's not true to the show. That's not true to who Walter White was. And I think that image endures in large part because of season 5 and the fact that it doesn't challenge both Walt and the audience's perception of Walt enough. The only scene that I truly like in the final episode of Breaking Bad is that scene between Walt and Skyler, where he admits that he did it for him. All of this makes sense for the character, and it makes sense he would have that moment of clarity after being alone in New Hampshire for so long. I almost said Vermont. I always get those two mixed up. I think that scene is this kind of moment of clarity, works for the character, but the rest of the finale just feels like wish fulfillment for Walt that he really truly hasn't earned, as he is the show's main villain at this point. This is a rant that is semi-related, but I also don't like that Walt's finale is this massive vengeance against Uncle Jack's gang, because vengeance in Breaking Bad is painted as a weakness for so many other characters. Gus's downfall was vengeance, but Walt is able to pull off this spectacular feat and get revenge on everyone he wanted to kill, and the only thing that comes of it is he dies, which is the most preferable outcome for him, because he's either dying of cancer or about to be arrested. So for Gus, vengeance is the death of everything. He gives up everything to have a shot at vengeance at Hector, whereas Walt is able to have his cake and eat it too. But overall, I do still quite like season 5. It has some of my favorite episodes in the entire series. Obviously, Ozymandias is goated, and Dead Freight is one of my favorites in the entire series as well. But overall, I think that it is one of the weaker seasons of Breaking Bad, largely due to shifts in characterization for Walt and others. I also don't think Jesse has a ton to do, but regardless of that, thank you for having me, Mr. Films. I really appreciate it.
Thanks as always, Quinn, for that input, but season 5 is still my favorite, sorry. And with that, there's my ranking on all the Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul seasons. This might be the end of the line for me talking about Breaking Bad on this channel, at least for a while. I'm pretty burnt out on both shows, especially Saul, which I've probably watched 6 or 7 times in the past 3 years. Thankfully, we've got Pluribusy airing now, so I'll be sure to talk about that some more once the season finishes. And more importantly, the best show of all time is currently airing its final season, and you bet your ass that's going to be my first video of the new year. So stay tuned for that, and I may or may not do one more video before the year is out. Thanks as always to Quinn and Better Watch TV for contributing. Be sure to check out their channels if you just can't get enough Breaking Bad or Ice and Fire in your life. Get subscribed to HN Films, and I'll see you next time on The Right Side Up.